Let's make sure that YouTube's got us.
All right.
Put a one in the chat if you can hear us. If you got out there, put a one in the chat if you can hear us.
One, two, three, four.
One, two, three, into the four. Darth Vader's coming to take your head, sucker.
Gotcha, bitch.
Gotcha. Got you, bitch.
Uh,
Your powers are weak, bitch. All right. Okay, we're going to get started.
all right. We're going through the welfare system. This is chapter 17, part 3 or section 3 of 17. So this is we're gonna be talking through the welfare system, and we're gonna do with housing for today. Um, so this we're gonna go ahead and start.
Yeah,
Go
this
ahead.
this this ties into the not only the Kerner Commission, but the Moynihan Report, and I think I did a couple of pieces about welfare in Moynihan Scissors. So all this stuff ties in. This
Yeah.
gives you kind of like the background. This is actually the actual study. Okay, Moynihan was just a overview. It was a proposal, and this was the actual study. And they've done many studies since then.
hmm And this pretty much is gonna just
Yeah,
tie in everything and just pretty much prove what we've been saying
yeah,
for the
pretty,
past
yeah,
couple of weeks.
yeah, pretty much. All right. Anytime you get ready to get started, go ahead.
All right.
Recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, Kerner Commission Report. Chapter 17, Recommendations for National Action, Part 7. 3. The Welfare System. Introduction. The Commission believes that our present system of public assistance contributes materially to the tensions and social disorganization that have led to civil disorders. The failures of the system alienate the taxpayers who support it, the social workers who administer it, and the poor who depend on it. As one critic told the Commission, the welfare system is designed to save money instead of people, and tragically ends up doing neither. The system is deficient in two critical ways. First, it excludes large numbers of persons who are in great need, and who, if provided a decent level of support, might be able to become more productive and self-sufficient. Second, for those who are included, it provides assistance well below the minimum necessary for a humane level of existence, and imposes restrictions that encourage continued dependency on welfare and undermine self-respect. In short, while the system is indispensable simply because for millions, mostly children, it supports basic needs, drastic reforms are required if it is to help people free themselves from poverty. Existing welfare programs are a labyrinth of federal, state, and local legislation. Over 90% of national welfare payments are made through programs that are partly or largely federally funded. These reach nearly 8 million persons each month.
Mm.
2.8 million are over 65, blind, or otherwise severely handicapped. 3.9 million are children in the Aid for Dependent Children program, AFDC, whose parents do not or cannot provide financial support. 1.3 million are the parents of children on AFDC. Of these, over 1 million are mothers, and less than 200,000 are fathers. About two-thirds of the fathers are incapacitated. Only 60,000 fathers are in the special program called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, Unemployed Parents, AFDC UP, operating now in 22 states. Among all the welfare programs,
AFDC.
AFDC and AFDC UP have clearly the greatest impact on youths and families in central city areas. For this reason, they will be the principal focus for discussion here. State and local governments
Yeah,
contribute a
because
total of about
go ahead and
45.
stop it for a second.
Yeah.
Um, ADC or AFDC was actually initially, and I think I put it in my video, initially designed for widows, okay?
hmm
Widows and orphans, right? It was modified in 1935 to include abandonment, okay? Um, they what they saw in the early '60s was, and I think Ruth Gilliam actually said this, saw in the early '60s is that it started to break up families, so they try to modify it. So instead of having a man in the house rule where the father could had to be dead or abandon the family, okay, listed, Well, they tried to make us a modification for unemployed fathers. Okay, so if the father couldn't find work, was unemployed, they could still apply for welfare. But the thing is, even at that, it had to be applied. It had to be run by the state, and most states didn't want that, right? So
Yeah.
um, that's how come there's only so few families on AFDC up where they have an unemployed father. They tried to modify it, but the thing is, federally they try to modify it, but it has to be initiated by the state, and very few states actually implemented that. But yeah, but go ahead. That's
Yeah,
just
that's what it says.
an
Only
aside.
operating under 22 states.
Yeah,
That's not
yeah.
the full United States.
Even in 22 states, it wasn't really applied very much.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
All right.
Percent of the cost of supporting the AFDC program, with each state setting the level of grants for its own residents. Accordingly, monthly payments vary widely from state to state. They range from $9.30 per AFDC recipient monthly in Mississippi to a high of $62.55 in New York. In fiscal year 1967, the total annual cost of the AFDC program, including federal, state, and local contributions, was approximately $2 billion, providing an average of about $36 monthly for each recipient. This sum is well below the poverty subsistence level under almost any standard. The National Advisory Council on Public Welfare has commented, "The national average provides little more than half the amount admittedly required by a family for subsistence. In some low-income states, it is less than a quarter of that amount." The low public assistance payments contribute to the perpetuation of poverty and deprivation that extend into future generations. Over the last 6 years, despite the longest sustained period of economic progress in the history of this country, the AFDC caseload has risen each year, while the unemployment rate has fallen. Cases increased nationally by
Monahan scissors, anybody?
319,000 during fiscal year 1967.
It keeps coming back, right?
Under present HEW estimates, increased by another 686,000 during the fiscal year 1968. The burden of welfare and the burden of the increases will fall principally on our central cities. In New York City alone, 525,000 people receive AFDC support, and 7,000 to 10,000 more are added each month. And it is estimated that in 1965, nationwide, over 50% of persons eligible to receive assistance under welfare programs were not enrolled. In addition to the AFDC program, almost all states have a program of general assistance to provide minimum payments based largely or entirely on need. During calendar year 1966, the states spent $336 million on general assistance. No federal funds have ever been available for this program. In fact, no federal funds have ever been available for millions of unemployed or underemployed men or women in the United States who are in need but are neither aged, severely handicapped, nor the parents of minor children. The dimensions of this pool of poor but unassisted individuals and families, either ineligible under present programs or eligible but unenrolled, is indicated by the fact that in 1966 there were 21.7 million non-aged persons in the United States with incomes below the poverty level as defined by the Social Security Administration. Only a third of these received assistance from major public welfare programs. The bulk of the non-aged poor live in families where there is a breadwinner who works either every day or who had worked a part of the year, so that the picture that people have of who the poor are is quite a different thing from an analysis of the poverty population. And what we have done, in effect, is carve out, because of our categorical approach to public assistance, a certain group of people within that overall poverty population to give help to. 70% of the non-aged poor families were headed by men, and 50% of these held full-time jobs, and 86% of them worked at least part of the year. So that the typical poor family is much like the typical American family, except they don't make enough money, and they have been historically excluded from the AFDC program.
Yep.
The gaps in coverage and low levels of payments are the source of much of the long-term dissatisfaction with the system. The day-to-day administration of the system creates even sharper bitterness and dissatisfaction, because it repeatedly serves to remind recipients that they are considered untrustworthy, ungrateful, promiscuous, and lazy. Among the most troublesome statutory requirements and administrative practices and regulations are the following. First, in most states, benefits are available only when a parent is absent from the home. Thus, in these states, an unemployed father whose family needs public assistance in order to survive must either abandon his family or see them go hungry. This so-called
That's called a BAM, sir.
And we don't have the missiles that a green gorilla has. That would be a double bam.
This pretty much just said that he would quote unquote abandon them,
Yeah,
or tell them to say he abandoned them just
yeah,
so they could get the benefits. And this is what people were doing even in the South. They were moving up north to
yeah,
try to find prosperity. They
yeah,
let the woman and the children go up north. They said that he was abandoning them while
yeah.
he's still in the South trying to find jobs.
Trying to find a job, and he would send money when he could.
Yep.
In fact, I might post because the last one I did, a lot of people that lived through it, in Chicago and other places actually post. I might actually post some of their replies because I don't know why people think that this didn't go on. All of a sudden, we're going to rewrite history. You know.
Yeah, it was even in that Period Go
Yeah.
project documentary. They said that's exactly what they were
That's what.
doing.
Yeah, yeah. It's better for a child to eat the
Yeah,
whole year rather than 3 months. Yeah.
exactly. Read.
You read books.
Read a
Check
book.
them out. Read a book. Read a book.
Read a motherfucking book.
Book.
Uh,
Man in the House rule was intended to prevent payments to children who have an alternative potential source of support. In fact, the rule seems to have fostered the breakup of homes and perpetuated reliance on welfare. The irritation caused by the rule is aggravated in some states by regular searches of recipients' homes to ferret out violations. Second, and until recently, all
Claudine.
amounts earned by adult welfare recipients
Yep.
on outside jobs, except for small allowances for expenses, were deducted directly from the welfare payments they would otherwise have received. This practice, required by federal law, appears to have taken away from many recipients the incentive to seek part or full-time employment.
Oh no.
67 amendments to the welfare laws permit retention of the first $30 earned by a recipient each month, and 1/3 of all earnings above that amount. This is a start in the right direction, but does not go nearly far enough. New York City has, for example, begun experimenting with a promising program that allows welfare mothers to keep the first $85 of earnings each month.
Yeah.
And
In
amounts
fact,
above that.
in fact, in the book I was reading about child support, she was actually talking about the modification of the welfare program, allowing incentivizing work, allowing them to
Mhm.
keep the first $50 to $100 that they earned without getting docked for their welfare assistance. So on a sliding scale, they still do it. That's what they call the welfare cliff.
Yeah,
You can earn so much before they start taking away
they
your
can always.
benefits.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah. Go ahead.
Third, in most states, there is a residency requirement, generally averaging around a year, before a person is eligible to receive welfare. These state regulations were enacted to discourage persons from moving from one state to another to take advantage of higher welfare payments. In fact, they appear to have had little, if any, impact on migration, and have frequently only served to prevent those in greatest need, desperately poor families arriving in a strange city, from receiving the boost that might have given them a fresh start. Fourth, though large amounts are being spent on social service programs for families, children, and young people, few of these programs have been effective. In the view of the Advisory Council on Public Welfare, the inadequacies in social services are themselves a major source of such social evils as crime and juvenile delinquency, mental illness, illegitimacy, multi-generational dependency, slum environments, and the widely deplored climate of unrest, alienation, and discouragement among many groups in the population. A final example
true.
of the system's inadequacy is the brittle relationship that exists between many welfare workers and the poor. The cumulative abrasive effects of the low levels of assistance, the complicated eligibility requirements, the continuing efforts required by regulations to verify eligibility, often by means that constitute flagrant invasions of privacy, have often brought about an adversary relationship between the caseworker and the recipient family. This is intensified by the fact that the investigative requirements not only force continuing confrontations, but in those states where the same worker performs both investigative and service functions, leave the worker little time to provide service. As was stated by Liesl Carter, Assistant Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, in testimony before the Commission, we think it is extremely important that welfare recipients begin to feel that the welfare worker is on their side instead of on the side of the agency.
Yeah, that's
There
true.
have been statements made that the welfare workers are among the most hated persons in the ghetto.
Yeah. You cannot make this shit
Uh,
up.
most
Oh,
hated person in
in the
the
most hated
ghetto.
person in the ghetto.
Yo.
Go ahead, man. That's funny as hell.
uh,
Oh boy. Okay. All right. Woosa. Woosa.
Woosah. Just the way she said it.
Hell yeah. Hated person in the ghetto.
Ghetto.
Anyway, man, continue before I have a bust a gut.
To feel that what the
Oh.
worker says is something that cannot be challenged. Nowhere do you get the feeling that the worker is there to really go to bat for recipients in dealing with the other pressures that they face in the community. One manifestation of the tension and dissatisfaction created by the present system has been the growth of national and local welfare protest groups. Some are seeking to precipitate a national welfare crisis, in part by bringing on the welfare rolls so many new recipients that America will be forced to face the enormity of its poverty problem. Others, often composed of welfare recipients or welfare workers, seek expanded welfare programs and attack day-to-day inequities in the administration of the system. On the other hand, many Americans who advocate better housing, better schools, and better employment opportunities for disadvantaged citizens oppose welfare programs of all kinds in the belief that they subsidize people who should be working. The fact is, as we have pointed out, that all but a small fraction of welfare recipients are disabled because of age, ill health, or the need to care for small children. Even more basic is the fact that the heads of most poor families who can work are working and are not on welfare. For both of these groups, the people in need, those who cannot work and those who can and do, the problem, in at least one vital respect, is the same: lack of a sufficient income to provide them with the kind of base on which they can begin to build a path out of poverty, if not for themselves, at least for their children. An altered and expanded welfare system, by extending support to more of those in need, by raising levels of assistance on a uniform national basis, and by eliminating demeaning restrictions, could begin to recapture the rich human resources that are being wasted by poverty. Basic strategies. In framing strategies to attack welfare problems, the Commission recognizes that a number of fundamental questions remain to be answered. Although many of the present inadequacies in the system can be identified and specific changes recommended, long-term measures for altering the system are still untested. A first strategy is to learn more about how welfare affects people and what its possibilities are for creative use. We endorse the recommendation of the Advisory Council on Public Welfare for greatly expanded research. We also commend the experimental incentive programs being carried out through the Department of Health Education and Welfare and the Office of Economic Opportunity, as well as the Model Cities program, through which some cities hope to develop integrated programs of income supplementation, job training, and education. We further commend the President's recent creation of a Commission on Income Maintenance Programs, which may provide answers to the complex problems here presented. Despite the questions left open, we believe that many specific inadequacies in the present structure can and should be corrected. The most important basic strategy we would recommend is to overhaul the existing categorical system to A. Provide more adequate levels of assistance on the basis of uniform national standards, B. Reduce the burden on state and local government by financing assistance costs almost entirely with federal funds, C. Create new incentives to work and eliminate the features that cause hardship and dependency, D. Improve family planning and other social services to
Yeah,
welfare
yeah,
recipients.
that's where the
Our longer
that's why come they brought in Title 10, which is birth control and abortion to actually cut down the number of kids, which it did. But thing is that on the other hand, uh, when they did cut down the number of children, it didn't matter because the women. Uh,
Stayed on welfare.
well, the thing is that they didn't get married, so they didn't form
Yeah.
a bond. They actually had babies out of wedlock. So even though the number of children were born out of wedlock was less, but the thing is you had more mothers having kids out of wedlock because they didn't depend on a man. So
Yeah.
it was catch 22.
Yeah. They didn't need that many kids, and plus, they
Yeah.
got probably just needed one or two, and that's it. All right.
range strategy, one for which we can offer only tentative guides, is the development of a national system of income supplementation to provide a basic floor of economic and social security for all Americans. Suggested programs. Overhauling the present system. To repair the defects in the existing categorical system is not simply a matter of changing one or two aspects. Major changes are needed in at least 7 areas. Standards of assistance. The federal government should develop a minimum income standard for individuals and families enrolled in AFDC. The standard for AFDC recipients should be at least as high as the subsistence poverty level periodically determined by the Social Security Administration. Only a few states now approach this poverty level, which is currently set at $3,335 for an urban family of 4. Amending
Wow.
legislation should, if feasible, also permit cost of living variations among the states and within high-cost areas in each state. As a critical first step toward raising assistance levels, the Commission recommends that the present provisions, under which the federal government pays 15/18 of the first $18 of AFDC monthly payments, be amended to provide that the federal government will assume the entire first $15 and the same proportion of payments beyond $15 presently applied to that above $18. Taken together with existing legislation that requires the states to maintain levels of support when federal assistance rates are increased, the effect of this change would be to raise by over 1/3 the monthly welfare payments in 8 states in the Deep South. In Mississippi, payments would be more than doubled. Extension of AFDC up. The Commission strongly urges that the temporary legislation enacted in 1961, which extends the AFDC programs to include needy families with 2 unemployed parents, be made permanent and mandatory on all states, and that the new federal definition of unemployment be broadened. This
See, that shit
program,
didn't
which
fly.
reaches the federal
I know,
level
right?
still intact, has been put into effect in only 22 states. Even in states where it has been implemented, the numbers participating have been small, partly because many states have
Yep.
narrowly
See?
defined the term unemployment, and partly because the number of broken homes makes many children eligible under the regular form of AFDC.
Yeah. Easier to get it if the guy leaves
Yeah.
or she kicks the guy out.
Because the states are unable to bear substantially increased welfare costs, the federal government should absorb a far greater share of the financial burden than it presently does. At least 2 methods are worth considering to achieve this end. The first would be to rearrange payment formulas so that even at the highest levels of payments, the federal government absorbed 90% or more of the costs. A second method would be to have the federal government assume 100% of the increment in costs that would be encountered through raising standards of assistance and rendering AFDC up mandatory. Under either of these approaches, the share of costs presently imposed on municipal governments should be removed to release their limited resources for other uses. Work incentives and training. In 3 important ways, steps were taken in the 1967 amendments to the Federal Welfare Act to encourage or compel welfare recipients to seek employment. Each of these controversial steps had some salutary aspects, but each requires substantial further attention. A. Job training. The amendments provide substantially greater funds for job training. This was in principle a wise step. The amendments also, however, require the states to condition grants to appropriate adult welfare recipients on their willingness to submit to job training. Though the Commission agrees that welfare recipients should be encouraged to accept employment or job training, we strongly disagree with compelling the mothers of small children to work or else lose welfare support. Many mothers, we believe, will want to work. A recent study of about 1,500 welfare mothers in New York City indicated that 70% of all mothers and 80% of Negro mothers would prefer to work than stay at home.
I wonder why.
1967 amendments provide funds for the first time for daycare programs for children of working mothers. Further expansion is desirable to make centers an effective means of enabling welfare recipients to take advantage of training and employment opportunities. Efforts should be made to ensure that centers are open in the evening and that more education features are built into center programs. State and federal standards that prevent centers from employing sub-professional workers, including welfare recipient mothers, should be removed. Welfare mothers themselves should be encouraged to set up cooperative centers with 1 or more mothers tending the children of other mothers and with welfare funds available for their salaries.
That's
Such
true.
living room daycare can only be effective if the mother taking care of the children can be paid without losing any substantial portion of her own welfare check.
Talking
C.
about
Retention.
the women used to have the houses to have a whole bunch of kids and she just babysit them. Is that what I'm guessing that's what they're talking about, the living room daycare?
Or they had they actually tried to do this in some housing projects
Mm-hmm.
where they had the mothers like a co-op where the mothers actually tended to the kids while other mothers worked.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, it did, they tried it, but it never really got off the ground. Never got any traction.
Yeah, because I know
So,
some places in the South, like, yeah, had like that one woman that all the mothers used to take the kids to.
oh yeah.
And just when
Yeah.
if they had to go somewhere, another, she would babysit all the
She would
children in the
babysit.
in the, in the area.
There was always the old mothers. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they had a whole bunch of kids, and and so they could just drop the kid off if they had to go someplace. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Of part of earnings. The amendments permit an AFDC or AFDC up recipient to retain the first $30 of earned income monthly and 1/3 of the balance. Both the sums that can be kept without penalty and the percentage of the balance that can be retained should be raised substantially to maximize the incentive to work. Some experimental programs are now going forward, but expanded efforts are needed to test different combinations and approaches. These programs should be supported at all levels of government. Removal of freeze on recipients. The 1967 welfare amendments freeze, for each state, the percentage of children who can be covered by federal AFDC grants to the percentage of coverage in that state in January 1968. The anticipated effect of this new restriction will be to prevent federal assistance during 1968 to 475,000 new applicants otherwise eligible under present standards. In the face of this restriction, states and cities will have to dig further into already depleted local resources to maintain current levels. If they cannot bear the increased costs, a second alternative, less feasible under existing federal requirements, will be to tighten eligibility requirements for everyone or reduce per capita payments. We strongly believe that none of these alternatives is acceptable and that the freeze should be eliminated. Restrictions on eligibility. The so-called man-in-the-house rule and the restrictions on new residents of states should be eliminated. Though these restrictions are currently being challenged in the courts, we believe that legislative and administrative action should be taken to eliminate them now. Other features of the system that should be altered or strengthened. A. Clear and enforceable rights. These include prompt determinations of eligibility and rights to administrative appeal with representation by counsel. A recipient should be able to regard assistance as a right and not as an act of charity. Applicants should be able to establish initial eligibility by personal statements or affidavits relating to their financial situation and family composition, subject to subsequent review conducted in a manner that protects their dignity, privacy, and constitutional rights. Searches of welfare recipients' homes, whether with or without consent, should be abandoned. These changes in procedures would not only accord welfare recipients the respect to which they are entitled, but would also release welfare workers to concentrate more of their time on providing service. These changes in such changes would also release a substantial portion of the funds spent
You hear echo?
but would also release
Yeah, I do. Do we have another? We have a tab open. You got a tab open?
Probably. Hold on, let me check.
A substantial portion of the funds spent
You hear echo?
Yeah, I do. Do we have another? We have a tab open. You got a tab open?
Probably. Hold on, let me check. You hear echo?
Yeah, I do.
Where is it?
You have a tab open. You got a tab open?
Probably. Hold on, let me check. You hear echo?
Yeah, I do.
Where is it?
You have a tab open. You got a tab open?
Probably. Hold on, let me check. You hear echo?
Yeah, I do.
Where is it?
I guess it was me. Because I thought it was muted. Oh,
Yeah, you made the sound come on.
Yeah. Huh?
You made the sound come on because I was trying to post my Cash App.
Oh,
Because
okay.
you asked me to post my Cash App.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right. There it goes. All right. Let's continue.
On establishing eligibility for the more important function of providing support. B. Separation of administration of AFDC and welfare programs for the disabled. The time that welfare workers have available for the provision of services would be increased further by separating the administration of AFDC and general assistance programs from aid to the aged and physically incapacitated. The problems of these latter groups are greatly different and might better be handled at the federal level through the Social Security Administration. Any such change would, of course, require that programs for the disabled and aged continue to be paid out of general funds and not to impair the integrity of the Social Security Trust Fund. C. Special Neighborhood Welfare Contact and Diagnostic Centers. Centers to provide the full complement of welfare services should be combined into the multi-purpose neighborhood service facilities being developed by the Office of Economic Opportunity and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Federal funds should be provided to help local welfare agencies decentralize their programs through these centers, which would include representatives of all welfare, social, rehabilitation, and income assistance services. D. Expansion of family planning programs. Social workers have found that many women in poverty areas would like to limit the size of their families and are either unaware of existing birth control methods or do not have such methods available to them. Governments at all levels, and particularly the federal, should underwrite broader programs to provide family planning information and devices to those who desire them. Through such programs, the Commission believes that a significant contribution can be made to breaking the cycle of poverty and dependency. Toward a national system of income supplementation. In 1949, Senator Robert A. Taft described a system to provide a decent level of income for all citizens. I believe that the American people feel that with the high production of which we are now capable, there is enough left over to prevent extreme hardship and maintain a minimum standard floor under subsistence, education, medical care, and housing, to give to all a minimum standard of decent living, and to all children a fair opportunity to get a start in life. Such a minimum standard of decent living has been called for by many other groups and individuals, including the AFL-CIO, major corporate executives, and numerous civil rights and welfare organizations. The study of the new Commission on Income Maintenance Programs and the Model Cities program will be of particular importance in providing direction. We believe that efforts should be made to develop a system of income supplementation with two broad and basic purposes: to provide for those who can work or who do work any necessary supplements in such a way as to develop incentives for fuller employment, to provide for those who cannot work and for mothers who decide to remain with their children a minimum standard of decent living, to prevent deprivation and aid in saving children from the prison of poverty that has held their parents. Under this approach, then, all present restrictions on eligibility other than need would be eliminated. In this way, two large and important groups not covered by present federal programs would be provided for: employed persons working at substandard hours or wages, and unemployed persons who are neither disabled nor the parents of minor children. A broad system of supplementation would involve substantially greater federal expenditures than anything now contemplated in this country. The cost will range widely depending on the standard of need accepted as the basic allowance to individuals and families, and the rate at which additional income above this level is taxed. Yet if the deepening cycle of poverty and dependence on the welfare system can be broken, if the children of the poor can be given the opportunity to scale the wall that now separates them from the rest of society, the return on this investment will be great indeed.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. It's never really been done wholesale. I think I think there was an attempt in the '70s. I think to actually do this, and it actually had some kind of effect by putting a lot more black kids and poor kids into the mainstream. And then the '80s kind of took all that stuff out again. Really,
Yeah. That,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Because the 80s, you saw like even that video that we showed, or
Hmm.
I showed, with the girl with the who was on welfare and the mother was still on welfare.
Yeah.
It just got bad again in the
Once
80s.
you got, yeah, just went down again in the '80s. Yeah.
Hmm. There wasn't until like what Bill Clinton signed that to where you start seeing people start to get off of it.
Yeah. Yep. First name, last name. They that's where the UBI is going to come in, but that's a whole different kettle of fish that they're talking about now.
Yeah, that's not, it's not tied to like children. It's gonna be
Yeah.
tied to just keeping people.
Individuals. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's a different kettle of fish altogether.
Yep. But
Outside of the scope of this discussion. Okay.
anything else that's on the welfare that you want
Uh.
before we go
Not
into
not.
housing?
Oh, yeah. We can go ahead and jump in. The thing is with welfare. One, they okay. Welfare was AFDC was always intended to be a stopgap method, even when Roosevelt actually introduced it, right? Because they made changes to the Social Security Act, right? So what was supposed to happen is that basically the 4 years between uh, those two acts of Social Security was to actually give the widow and the child enough subsistence to live off of until they can actually collect on the death of the father
Hmm.
or the disability of the father, to where they can actually get those funds from Social Security. Okay, it was never intended to be this broad thing that it grew into, but the thing is that it continued and it kind of grew out of control. So AFDC or welfare, as we know it, was never intended from the very beginning to be this big. And and the thing is, you had to transition from a rural area from farming to industry. So you had this big industrial switch. You put a lot of people out of work, and so there's a whole lot of factors that went into it. It wasn't just welfare. It wasn't just the men having not having jobs. It wasn't just the women wanting to be independent. It was all those things all mixed together. The thing is, it just became worse with black people. So it's a complex thing, but the thing is that a lot of people don't want to put all the components in there. So it never really got figured out. Really, the Bill Clinton just forced everybody off of welfare in '96, just pushed
Yeah.
everybody off, and pushed all the women to go to work, even though they still find ways around what they're doing. But most black women actually work. There's very few people on welfare anymore.
Yeah. That's yeah, that's true. And I
That's true.
find it interesting that they were already talking about the men in the house rule back then. Even though they were talking about it in I guess court cases about that rule and how it's unfair.
The thing is that it was the man in the house rule was they tried not to do it. The federal government tried not to get states to break up families. But thing is, they really didn't want men. Really, what it was, they didn't want men getting welfare if they were able bodied to actually work. So
Yeah.
that's what they're really trying to prevent. In other words, what they're saying, if there's a parent or another adult that can suffice as income to reduce the amount that the state or the federal government has to pay, that's what they were trying to. That's what they tried to actually encourage or try to force. So even though, like you see on the books, they could have allowed an unemployed parent, which is a father, to actually be there in the house with the kids. Okay, but most states, number one, didn't implement it, and the ones that did made it so restrictive that you probably couldn't get it anyway. And basically, when they made it restrictive, guess who really couldn't get it? It was black people.
Hmm.
White,
That
if
was
there's
back in
fathers in the house.
the 30s and stuff.
Well, the thing is, in the '60s. Okay,
Or the
remember the
60s.
the AFDC up.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah.
yeah, and when they actually passed it in '61, okay, those so that white fathers could actually stay in the house. But the thing is that they made it so restrictive that very few fathers could stay in it, and the ones that could stay in it were probably white, they probably wasn't black. But go ahead, we can go into housing,
All
so we
right.
can get a start on it.
End of section 56. Recording by Maria Casper. Section 57 of the Kerner Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. Kerner Commission Report. Chapter 17, Recommendations for National Action, Part 8. 4. Housing. Introduction. The passage of the National Housing Act in 1934 signaled a new federal commitment to provide housing for the nation's citizens. Congress made the commitment explicit 15 years later in the Housing Act of 1949, establishing as a national goal the realization of a decent home and suitable environment for every American family. Today, after more than 3 decades of fragmented and grossly underfunded federal housing programs, decent housing remains a chronic problem for the disadvantaged urban household. 56% of the country's non-white families live in central cities today, and of these, nearly 2/3 live in neighborhoods marked by substandard housing and general urban blight. For these citizens, condemned by segregation and poverty to live in the decaying slums of our central cities, the goal of a decent home and suitable environment is as far distant as ever. During the decade of the 1950s, when vast numbers of Negroes were migrating to the cities, only 4 million of the 16.8 million new housing units constructed throughout the nation were built in the central cities. These additions were counterbalanced by the loss of 1.5 million central city units through demolition and other means. The result was that the number of non-whites living in substandard housing increased from 1.4 to 1.8 million, even though the number of substandard units declined.
Wow.
Hmm.
Statistics
Okay.
available for the period since 1960 indicate that the trend is continuing. There has been virtually no decline in the number of occupied, dilapidated units in metropolitan areas. New York City and Watts actually show an increase in the number of such units.
That's
These
true. I lived
statistics
there.
led the Department of Housing and Urban Development to conclude that while the trend in the country as a whole is toward less substandard housing, there are individual neighborhoods and areas within many cities where the housing situation continues to deteriorate. Inadequate housing is not limited to Negroes. Even in the central cities, the problem affects 2.5 times as many white as non-white households. Nationally, over 4 million of the nearly 6 million occupied substandard units in 1966 were occupied by whites. It is also true that Negro housing in large cities is significantly better than that in most rural areas, especially in the South. Good quality housing has become available to Negro city dwellers at an increasing rate since the mid-1950s, when the post-war housing shortage ended in most metropolitan areas. Nevertheless, in the Negro ghetto, grossly inadequate housing continues to be a critical problem. Substandard, old, and overcrowded structures. Nationwide, 25% of all non-whites living in central cities occupied substandard units in 1960, compared to 8% of all whites.
Hmm.
Preliminary Census Bureau data indicate that by 1966, the figures had dropped to 16 and 5% respectively. However, if deteriorating units and units with serious housing code violations were added, the percentage of non-whites living in inadequate housing in 1966 becomes much greater. In 14 of the largest U.S. cities, the proportions of all non-white housing units classified as deteriorating, dilapidated, or lacking full plumbing in 1960, the latest date for which figures were available, were as follows. New York. Percentage of non-white occupied housing units classified as deteriorating or dilapidated, 1960, 33.8%. Percentage of non-white occupied housing units classified as deteriorating, dilapidated, or sound but without full plumbing, 1960, 42.4%.
Speed that up. She's gonna read this
Chicago,
whole thing.
32.1% deteriorating or dilapidated, 42.8% deteriorating, dilapidated, or sound but without full plumbing. Los Angeles, 14.7% deteriorating or dilapidated, 18.1% deteriorating, dilapidated, or sound but without full plumbing. Philadelphia, 28.6% deteriorating or dilapidated, 32.0% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing. Detroit, 27.9% deteriorating or dilapidated, 30.1% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing. Baltimore, 30.5% deteriorating or dilapidated, 31.7% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing. Houston, 30.1% deteriorating or dilapidated, 36.7% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing. Cleveland, 29.9% deteriorating or dilapidated, 33.9% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing. Washington, D.C., 15.2% deteriorating or dilapidated, 20.8% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing. St. Louis, 40.3% deteriorating or dilapidated, 51.6% deteriorating,
big jump.
dilapidated, or without full plumbing. San
Yep.
Francisco, 21.3% deteriorating or dilapidated,
San Francisco. Whoa, wow.
24.0% deteriorating,
Yeah, I know. So
dilapidated, or
San
without full
Francisco's a
plumbing.
big jump too.
Dallas, 41.3% deteriorating or dilapidated, 45.9%
Pittsburgh.
deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing.
Wow.
New Orleans, 44.3% deteriorating or dilapidated, 56.9%
They want taking care of
deteriorating,
these
dilapidated, or without
buildings.
full plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh, 49.1% deteriorating or dilapidated, 58.9% deteriorating, dilapidated, or without full plumbing.
Like even in that documentary period ago, what
Yeah.
it was saying that they had like a pipe burst in the building,
Mm-hmm.
and because it wasn't kept up,
Yeah.
and they didn't have water for like at least about 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
Just
Yeah. No
because of
plumbing.
no plumbing. The plumbing was
Yeah.
bad.
Mm.
And so they had to wait till they get fixed that, and people were. It was a horrible situation for them.
Yeah, yeah, and I've lived through some of that too, where the plumbing didn't work, and for a week or something like that, and the stuff that you had to do. But the thing is, unfortunately, my folks came from the country,
Yeah.
so so they know how to adapt, man. So, stuff like that happening today, man. We have people freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we're gonna have the same thing, man. 2022, 2023, it's just gonna be it's gonna be different. So a lot of this stuff's gonna repeat itself.
Yeah. I remember sometimes during the wintertime, if the pipes got frozen,
Mm-hmm.
we would have to find out where the pipes were leading towards, and then figure out where the ice was by digging up where the pipe is, and then just hitting it, or
Mm-hmm.
knock the ice a little bit loose just so we can get our plumbing back. We had to do that sometimes.
Mm. Yeah.
That's
Yep.
how cold it was.
Yeah. Well, I'm from California, man. I don't know nothing about it.
City slicker.
Yankee. I'm a Yankee. God damn it.
Let's continue.
Conditions were far worse than these citywide averages in many specific disadvantaged neighborhoods. For example, a study of housing in Newark, New Jersey before the 1967 disorders showed the following situation in certain predominantly Negro neighborhoods as of 1960. Percentage of housing units dilapidated or deteriorated in selected areas of Newark, 1960. Area number 1, population 25,300, 75.5% non-white. 91% of all housing units dilapidated or deteriorated.
Damn. No wonder they
Wow.
riot.
Area
Yeah.
number 2, population
Dang.
48,200, 64.5% non-white. 63.8% of all housing units dilapidated or deteriorating. Area number 3A, population 48,300, 74.8% non-white. 43.1% of all housing units dilapidated or
Oh, that's a good
deteriorating.
neighborhood.
I know.
These three areas contained 30% of the total population of Newark in
But damn,
1960 and
that
62% of its
area, that
non-white
one area,
population.
91%.
The commission carried out special analyses of 1960 housing conditions in 3 cities, concentrating on all census tracts with 1960 median incomes of under $3,000 for both families and individuals. It also analyzed housing conditions in Watts. The results showed that the vast majority of people living in the poorest areas of these cities were Negroes, and that a high proportion lived in inadequate housing. Detroit. Total population of the study area, 162,375. 67.5% non-white. 32.7% of housing units substandard by HUD definition. 53.1% dilapidated, deteriorating, or sound but lacking full plumbing. Washington, D.C. Total population of study area, 97,084. 74.5% non-white. 23.9% of housing units substandard by HUD definition. 37.3% dilapidated, deteriorating, or sound but lacking full plumbing.
Mm.
Memphis. Total population of study area, 150,827. 74% non-white. 35% of housing units substandard by HUD definition. 46.5% dilapidated, deteriorating, or sound but lacking full plumbing. Watts area of Los Angeles. Total population of study area, 49,074. 87.3% non-white. 10.5% of housing units substandard by HUD definition. 29.1% dilapidated, deteriorating,
Oh,
or
Watts want
sound
that
but
bad.
lacking full plumbing.
It was L.A.
Occupied
L.A. was a little bit newer
in each of the
and
10
more spread out.
It's more spread
So
out.
that's how come they call the L.A. ghettos the almost like the Beverly Hills, because people come from the eastern ghettos, them
Hmm.
eastern housing projects, and they said, "This ain't no ghetto. This ain't no project. You guys got lawns."
I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. L.A. had some of the best ghettos in the country. Best looking ghettos, anyway.
Hmm.
metropolitan areas analyzed by the Commission, substantially higher percentages of non-whites than whites occupied units built prior to 1939. Percentage of white and non-white occupied housing units built prior to 1939 in selected metropolitan areas. Cleveland, 33.2% white occupied units, 90.6% non-white occupied units. Dallas, 31.9% white occupied, 52.7% non-white occupied. Detroit, 46.2% white occupied, 86.1% non-white occupied. Kansas City, 54.4% white occupied, 89.9% non-white occupied. Los Angeles, Long Beach, 36.6% white occupied, 62.4% non-white occupied. New Orleans, 52.9% white occupied, 62.2% non-white occupied. Philadelphia, 62% white occupied,
The only
90.8%
one that's in
non-white
the
occupied.
50s for
St.
non-white
Louis,
is Dallas.
57.9% white occupied, 84.7% non-white occupied. San Francisco, Oakland, 51.3% white occupied, 67.6% non-white occupied. Washington, D.C., 31.9% white occupied, 64.9% non-white occupied. Finally, Negro housing units are far more likely to be overcrowded than those occupied by whites. In U.S. metropolitan areas in 1960, 25% of all non-white units were overcrowded by the standard measure. That is, they contained 1.01 or more persons per room. Only 8% of all white-occupied units were in this category. Moreover, 11% of all non-white occupied units were seriously overcrowded, 1.51 or more persons per room,
Yep.
compared with 2% for white-occupied units. The figures were as follows in the 10 metropolitan areas analyzed by the Commission. Percentage of white and non-white occupied units with 1.01 or more persons per room
She going
in
through all the
selected
grass, ain't
metropolitan
she?
areas. Cleveland, 6.9% of white occupied units, 19.3% of non-white occupied units. Dallas, 9.3% of white occupied units, 28.8% of non-white occupied units.
I think she's the only one
Detroit,
that goes through these
8.6% of white
graphs.
occupied
The other
units,
guys didn't.
17.5% of non-white occupied units. Kansas City, 8.7% of white occupied units, 18% of non-white occupied units. Los Angeles, Long Beach, 8% of white occupied units, 17.4% of non-white occupied units. New Orleans, 12% of white occupied units, 36.1% of non-white occupied units. Philadelphia, 4.9% of white occupied units, 16.3% of non-white occupied units. St. Louis, 11.8% of white occupied units, 28% of non-white occupied units. San Francisco, Oakland, 6% of white occupied units, 19.7% of non-white occupied units. Washington, D.C., 6.
Are you seeing this? Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing on this? Because it seems like she's saying something different than what that's been posted right here.
It could be. It could be.
So I'm not looking at it like, wait, what she says 19 and she says 25 right here.
Yeah, she could have a different script.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, it's possible.
6.2% of white occupied units, 22.6% of non-white occupied units. Higher rents for poorer housing. Negroes in
Okay.
large cities are often forced to pay the same rents as whites and receive less for their money, or pay higher rents for the same accommodations. The first type of discriminatory effect, paying the same amount but receiving less, is illustrated by data from the 1960 census for Chicago and Detroit. In certain Chicago census tracts, both whites and non-whites paid median rents of $88, and the proportions paying various specific rents below that median were almost identical.
Oh, I was at the
But
wrong
the
spot.
units
Never
rented
mind.
by non-whites
Okay.
were typically smaller. The median number of rooms was 3.35 for non-whites versus 3.95 for whites. In worse condition, 30.7% of all non-white units were deteriorated or dilapidated units versus 11.6% for whites. Occupied by more people, the median household size was 3.53 for non-whites versus 2.88 for whites. And more likely to be overcrowded, 27.4% of non-white units had 1.01 or more persons per room versus 7.9% for whites. In Detroit, whites paid a median rental of $77 as compared to $76 among non-whites. Yet 27% of non-white units were deteriorating or dilapidated as compared to only 10.3% of all white units. The second type of discriminatory effect, paying more for similar housing, is illustrated by data from a study of housing conditions in disadvantaged neighborhoods in Newark, New Jersey. In 4 areas of that city, including the 3 areas cited previously, non-whites with housing essentially similar to that of whites paid rents that were from 8.1% to 16.8% higher. Though the typically larger size of non-white households with consequent harder wear and tear may partly justify the differences in rental, the study found that non-whites were paying a definite color tax of apparently well over 10% on housing. This condition prevails in most racial ghettos. The combination of high rents and low incomes forces many Negroes to pay an excessively high proportion of their income for housing. This is shown by the following chart, showing the percentage of renter households paying over 35% of their income for rent in 10 metropolitan areas. Percentages of white and non-white occupied
that's what's all
units
it's at.
with households paying 35% or more of their income
Let's
for
speed
rent
this up.
in selected metropolitan areas.
We almost at an
Cleveland,
hour mark.
8.6% of white
Yeah.
occupied units, 33.8% of non-white occupied units. Dallas, 19.2% of white occupied units, 33.8% of non-white occupied units. Detroit, 21.2% of white occupied units, 40.5% of non-white occupied units. Kansas City, 20.2% of white occupied units, 40.0% of non-white occupied units. Los Angeles, Long Beach, 23.4% of white occupied units, 28.4% of non-white occupied units. New Orleans, 16.6% of white occupied units, 30.5% of non-white occupied units. Philadelphia, 19.3% of white occupied units, 32.1% of non-white occupied units. St. Louis, 18.5% of white occupied units, 36.7% of non-white occupied units. San Francisco, Oakland, 21.2% of white occupied units, 25.1% of non-white occupied units. Washington, D.C., 18.5% of white occupied units, 28.3% of non-white occupied units. The high proportion of income that must go for rent leaves less money in such households for other expenses. Undoubtedly, this hardship is a major reason many Negro households regard housing as one of their worst problems.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Discrimination in housing
it's
code
true for
enforcement.
everybody, actually.
Yeah.
Thousands of landlords in disadvantaged neighborhoods openly violate building codes with impunity, thereby providing a constant demonstration of flagrant discrimination by legal authorities. A high proportion of residential and other structures contain numerous violations of building and housing codes. Refusal to remedy these violations is a criminal offense, one which can have serious effects upon the victims living in these structures. Yet in most cities, few building code violations in these areas are ever corrected, even when tenants complain directly to municipal building departments. There are economic reasons why these codes are not rigorously enforced. Bringing many old structures up to code standards and maintaining them at that level often would require owners to raise rents far above the ability of local residents to pay. In New York City, rigorous code enforcement has already caused owners to board up and abandon over 2,500 buildings
Yeah,
rather than incur the expense of repairing them.
yeah, that's true.
Nevertheless, open violation of codes is a constant source of distress to low-income tenants and creates serious hazards to health and safety in disadvantaged neighborhoods.
Yeah. That's where a lot of
Housing
this welfare
conditions.
money could have gone
Yeah,
to as
fixing up
job
these
program to
buildings.
fixing up these buildings. Yeah. Yeah. That's what we had proposed to do in Baltimore. Train the kids that in certain skills and apprentice them actually going out and learning the skills by actually rebuilding some of these some of the
Neighborhoods.
tenements, some of the neighborhood brownstones that in row houses that were boarded up.
Yeah, that would have worked because
They
they would have got a skill and they would have helped out their neighborhood.
had the neighborhood it
They would
raised
have
up
more pride.
yeah, it raised up the property tax, put have more housing available for people. Could have done you're spending the money anyway. It's just how you spend your money.
Yeah, yeah, that would have worked. That's I don't see no problem with that one.
And disorder. Housing conditions in the disorder cities surveyed by the Commission paralleled those for ghetto Negroes generally. Many homes were physically inadequate. 47% of the units occupied by non-whites in the disturbance areas were substandard.
Hmm.
Overcrowding was common. In the metropolitan areas in which the disorders occurred, 24% of all units occupied by non-whites were overcrowded,
Hmm.
against only 8.8% of the white-occupied units. Negroes paid higher percentages of their income for rent than whites. In both
Hmm.
the disturbance areas and the greater metropolitan area of which they were a part, the median rent as a proportion of median income was over 25% higher
No,
for
that's
non-whites than for
yeah,
whites.
yeah,
The result
What are
has
you about
been
to say?
widespread discontent
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Now it's for everybody paying higher rent, so it's spread
Yeah.
out. Yeah, so kind of spread everybody.
Hmm.
with housing conditions and costs. In nearly every disorder city surveyed, grievances related to housing were important factors in the structure of Negro discontent. Poverty and housing deterioration. The reasons many Negroes live in decaying slums are not difficult to discover. First and foremost is poverty. Most ghetto residents cannot pay the rent necessary to support decent housing. This prevents private builders from constructing new units in the ghettos or from
Yep.
rehabilitating old ones, for either action involves an investment that would require substantially higher rents than most ghetto dwellers can pay. It
Capitalism.
also deters landlords from maintaining units that are presently structurally sound. Maintenance, too, requires additional investment. and at the minimal rents that inner-city Negroes can pay, landlords have little incentive to provide it. The implications of widespread poor maintenance are serious. Most of the gains in Negro housing have occurred through the turnover which occurs as part of the filtering down process. As the white middle class moves out, the units it leaves are occupied by Negroes. Many of these units are very old. Without proper maintenance, they soon become dilapidated, so that the improvement in housing resulting from the filtering down process is only temporary. The 1965 New York City survey points up the danger. During the period that the number of substandard units was decreasing, the number of deteriorating units increased by 95,000.
Yeah, see, even in that Perigo projects, one of the
Uh-huh.
things that happened in that documentary was the landlords were trying to raise the rents of the housing projects, but the residents fought against that to keep it at the same level. Well, the result of that is that's why those pipes busted, because they couldn't maintain it. They didn't have the maintenance crew to make sure the trash was taken out, the pipes were working, and
Mm-hmm.
they had to board up some of those houses in those areas because they couldn't fix it, so they just boarded them up. You say no one can live in this area or live in this room or an apartment. You have to go to this other apartment because they had the money or the resources to fix it up. So, I mean, everything she says right there is correct. It takes money to fix shit.
It does. What did the money? It was always money. The tax base, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Uh,
Remember when we first started? What was the biggest complaints? It was about what? Housing and jobs. Housing, jobs, and money.
yeah, that is
Yep.
true. How much more you want to go on this?
What time is it? We got. We can
We're
go.
an hour in.
We can go another 15 minutes. Or how far do we have to go down to actually finish?
Uh, that's what I was looking at before she was going through that thing. It looks like quite a bit.
Okay. And we can go about 10. What? Yeah, go out 10 more minutes.
Okay.
That'll be fine. We get through most of it.
All right. Let me go back up. It's just it. Yeah, discrimination.
Yeah, capitalism plus red line,
Discrimination.
hell of a combo. Yep. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
The second
Yeah.
major factor condemning vast numbers of Negroes to urban slums is racial discrimination in the housing market. Discrimination prevents access to many non-slum areas, particularly the suburbs, and has a detrimental effect on ghetto housing itself. By restricting the area open to a growing population, housing discrimination makes it profitable for landlords to break up ghetto apartments for denser occupancy, hastening housing deterioration. Further, by creating a back pressure in the racial ghettos, discrimination keeps prices and rents of older, more deteriorated housing in the ghetto market higher than they would be in a truly free and open market. End of section 57. Recording by Maria Casper. Section 58 of the Kerner Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, Kerner Commission Report. Chapter 17, Recommendations for National Action, Part 9. Existing Programs. To date, federal building programs have been able to do comparatively little to provide housing for the disadvantaged. In the 31-year history of subsidized federal housing, only about 800,000 units have been constructed, with recent production averaging about 50,000 units a year. By comparison, over a period only 3 years longer, FHA insurance guarantees have made possible the construction of over 10 million middle and upper income units. Federal programs also have done little to prevent the growth of racially segregated suburbs around our cities. Until 1949, FHA official policy was to refuse to insure any unsegregated housing. It was not until the issuance of Executive Order 11063 in 1962 that the agency required non-discrimination pledges from loan applicants. It is only within the last few years that a range of programs has been created that appears to have the potential for substantially relieving the urban housing problem. Direct federal expenditures for housing and community development have increased from $600 million in fiscal 1964 to nearly $3 billion in fiscal 1969. To produce significant results, however, these programs must be employed on a much larger scale than they have been so far. In some cases, the constraints and limitations imposed upon the programs must be reduced. In a few instances, supplementary programs should be created. In all cases, incentives must be provided to induce maximum participation by private enterprise in supplying energy, imagination, capital, and production capabilities. Federal housing programs must also be given a new thrust, aimed at overcoming the prevailing patterns of racial segregation. If this is not done, those programs will continue to concentrate the most impoverished and dependent segments of the population into the central city ghettos, where there is already a critical gap between the needs of the population and the public resources to deal with them. This can only continue to compound the conditions of failure and hopelessness, which lead to crime, civil disorder, and social disorganization.
True.
Basic strategies. We believe the following basic strategies should be adopted. The supply of housing suitable for low-income families should be expanded on a massive basis.
That's true.
The basic reason many Negroes are compelled to live in inadequate housing is the failure of the private market to produce decent housing at rentals they can afford to pay. Programs we have recommended elsewhere are directed toward raising income levels, yet it is obvious that in the foreseeable future there will continue to be a gap between the income of many Americans and the price of decent housing produced by the normal market mechanisms.
Yep,
Thus,
exactly.
the implementation of the strategy depends on programs which not only generate more lower-cost housing, but also raise the rent-paying capability of low-income households. Areas outside of ghetto neighborhoods should be opened up to occupancy by racial minorities.
Mm-hmm.
Provision of decent low-cost housing will solve only part of the problem. Equally fundamental is the elimination of the racial barrier in housing. Residential segregation prevents equal access to employment opportunities and obstructs efforts to achieve integrated education. A single society cannot be achieved as long as this cornerstone of segregation stands.
Hold on right there. Hold on right there.
Suggested
The whole part of people don't understand is that the goal of any country is to is actually form a unified society. So they don't, it doesn't behoove any country. Look at what's going on in Ukraine, right? We have all these separate groups and the turmoil that it causes. It causes wars, right? You have Russians on one, native Russians on one side. You get different kind of Ukrainians or Serbs on another side, and you got all these disparate groups that speak different languages. And look what keeps going on. All this dissension. Okay, to have a harmonious society, you need to integrate all these people. So, so people think integration was bad for Negroes. It has to happen. So whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter what we want, right? Okay, their goal of the United States was to integrate black people. Period. So whether it's by choice or by force. So saying that black people chose it, not necessarily. That's the deal that was cut under civil rights. Okay, we need to integrate you. Okay, that's what Moynihan said. Moynihan said, okay, how do we integrate the Negro into the family of the United States? Give black men jobs. So the whole point of all this that they've gone through, all these proposals being passed, busing kids, all that kind of stuff, is to integrate the society.
Black people. Yep,
to integrate black people and make them part of the society rather than a separate thing that they had for 200 years. But go ahead.
And that was the whole thing about even doing this Kerner commission is to try to get rid of the two separate societies.
Yep, exactly.
Because there's black people had their own society and whites had their own, and it kept butting heads. As we said before, that when you had all these riots going on, guess what? It was whites and blacks fighting each other.
But the blacks fighting each other, but also blacks fighting the system that oppressed them. So yeah.
Programs. We are proposing programs in 10 areas to illustrate how we believe basic strategies we have outlined can be put into effect. Provision of 600,000 low and moderate income housing units next year, and 6 million units over the next 5 years. An expanded and modified below market interest rate program. An expanded and modified rent supplement program and an ownership supplement program. Federal write-down of interest rates on loans to private builders. An expanded and more diversified public housing program. An expanded model cities program. A reoriented and expanded urban renewal program. Reform of obsolete building codes. Enactment of a national, comprehensive, and enforceable open occupancy law. Reorientation of federal housing programs to place more low and moderate income housing outside of ghetto areas. The supply of housing suitable for low-income families should be expanded. The Commission recommends provision of 600,000 low and moderate income housing units next year and 6 million units over the next 5 years.
Yeah,
Some
which never really happened.
Yeah, I think we'll stop there. It's about 10 minutes in.
Okay. All right. Number one, Art, you need to pimp your channel.
Yeah.
So people, you know.
Let me
I think
put the link in
you,
here.
you yeah, you can go ahead and show it if you want. Show what's going on in your channel.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Uh,
Because I'm just standing in because of events, uncontrollable events
that has transpired.
has transpired. So we're trying to get the. This is where the Coliseum is going to be. But we had a pretty good turnout on the last Coliseum, but this is where the Coliseum is going to be. We're trying to get Brother Art back up and running. Back to his form. 'Cause I think what was your peak as far as subs?
Uh,
2,500.
26, and it was going.
2,600.
Yeah,
Yeah.
26.
Okay, we're trying to get him back, get him back to where he was. So if you're listening or you've seen this on replay, go ahead and subscribe back to him, hit the bell. Um, we're going to try to do more stuff over there. I'm going to try to help him do more stuff over there on his channel, kind of get the channel up and started. Because I know you guys follow me every place I go, sometimes whether it's good or bad. So hey, the trolls can subscribe too. I know the trolls subscribe to me to find out where I'm going and what channels I'm headed to. So hey, follow me on over there too. So like I said,
Yeah.
I'm trying to do more on the Coliseum on Saturday. Actually, participate more. We're trying to get more people to come over. And if you want me to answer your dumbass questions, that's where I'll be on Saturday. Okay.
Yeah, and also too, I do have all of the Kerner Commission downloaded, so I am going to try to upload those tonight. I'm probably do one tonight, and then I'm going to do each day. I'll do one today, do two tomorrow, and then so on and so on until I get all. I think we stopped at 7.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The thing is that the Kerner Commission. I think the Kerner Commission is probably more important than the Monahan report. I really do. The
Well,
Monahan
yeah, it's
report
the
is kind of
study.
overview, but this is the study, and these themes keep repeating itself over and over and over again. Even though even in the article that Art found in the New York Times, I always point to the Monahan report. They always skip over the Kerner Commission. This is probably more important than the Monahan report. It's probably the single most important civil rights study ever done.
Hmm.
But people look over it. We're talking about 700 pages. It took them like a year and a half. So, and a lot of your policing, your housing, FHA, urban renewal, the Urban League, all that stuff came out of the Kerner Commission. The thing
Yep.
is that it needs to be studied. If you want to see how the effect over the last 40, 50 years, this needs to be studied because a lot of stuff that was enacted came out of this study. Okay, a
Yeah.
lot of stuff.
Hey, you're listening to it. You're hearing our commentary on it.
Yeah,
We're telling you
yeah. I mean, you listen to Charles because Charles was on what
two or three
two,
times.
2 or 3 times. He was actually telling you, actually agreeing with all the stuff that was actually in the commission. He said, "Yeah, we put that in. We put that in. That was put in. Okay, this is how we police. Yeah, we have this. We have this. All this stuff came out of the study. You know,
Hmm.
and so it needs to be. Uh, Art's doing a good job of actually taking you through it, but you need to actually download it, read it yourself.
Yeah, it's free, people. You ain't got
It's
to pay
free.
for it.
Ain't got to pay for it. Your government paid for it already. It's free.
But yeah, we're going to be doing probably a couple more. Than like I said, I'm not going to try to go through the whole entire thing, but I just going through the parts that I think are interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you saw the same themes about welfare was kept being repeated about the man in the house rule,
hmm
the AFDC up, um, about the AFDC and how the proposals they try to implement. All this kind of stuff it's in there. It's probably not as extensive. Actually, the last video second to last video I did about
the
about
Monahan
the
scissors.
Monahan scissors. I have a big thick child support book, and that came out of the section of the child support book. because what they did after the 19, I think it's after 1976, they started offloading welfare onto the backs of men. So this is where your increase in child support came from, because it was always supposed to be offloaded onto the backs of men, and they had refused up until like 1976, and then with with the neoliberals coming in, they said, okay, we're gonna switch this over. So we're going to actually push to actually find these guys and make them pay more so that the federal government can actually pay less. And that had
Yeah.
been increasing, up until really up through the 80s and 90s, and then I think it kind of peaked in like the 2000s. But all this stuff is all tied into the same thing.
Hmm. It's interesting stuff too, if I
Yeah,
might say.
very. Yeah, MLR said my father used to work for the Urban Renewal Board as an accountant in the islands. Yeah, okay, yeah. Talk about, about this. This is active. This is because what the thing is that what they didn't want to happen is what happened to Northern Europe in the late 18th century, early 19th century, where they had this big shift from rural to industrialism, right? Where they took people off the land and put them in factories, right? Where people with kids and women and children were actually working 12 to 16-hour days, in
Hmm.
factories, okay? And the displacement and the problems that they had. Okay, they didn't want to go through that again. That's like they implemented welfare and housing projects and stuff like that because you had a similar shift. In fact, they talked about it where the black folks actually moved from the rural south up to the north and actually overcrowded the cities, and there wasn't enough jobs and housing to go around, and they had needed to alleviate that because they weren't building. Because the United States is really decentralized. So the federal government couldn't just step in and say you need to build a certain amount of houses here, a certain amount of projects there. They didn't want to do that. And even with welfare, AFDC was actually funded by the federal government. It was actually handed off to the states to implement. So it's this big decentralization, and that's how come the welfare and all these laws are actually uneven. When you have a top-down country like China, right? They just build the shit. Fuck it.
Hmm.
We don't care about the private industry, right? We need a certain amount of housing, a certain amount of units for people. We just gonna build it. United
Yeah.
States is too liberal. It doesn't work that way. That's how come they're talking about incentivizing people to make a profit to build these things instead of just building it.
And
They're probably getting ready to do it again.
yeah, and they probably gonna do like they did Section 8, make
Yeah,
some more Section 8 housing and expand
yeah,
that.
yeah. Try to push the money through the private sector,
Hmm.
which has uneven results. But that's what happens when you live in a capitalist country.
Square box and a circle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's your latest? Play the intro of your latest. Give them a taste.
The intro.
Yeah, just the well, you play the intro, but the thing is, just play a taste of your latest video or one that you think people need to pay attention to. Just give them a little taste.
Hey, what's going on, peeps? This is Art, and I'm coming at you with another video. And this is coming from the Sierra's Prayer, and I want to talk about this. And basically, all Sierra's Prayer is nothing but baby mama hope. That's really what it is.
Baby Mama
They
Hope.
are going off the shit.
Wait, hold on. Stop. What the fuck is that? Baby Mama Hope? Where the hell you get that shit from, man?
It's baby mama hope, man. That's what I pray for a God fearing man, but they take care of you, my damn kids.
God damn. You ain't shit though, boy. Go ahead, man. Play a few more minutes of it, man. You ain't shit though.
As what they aspire to, what they want to happen. Like, I'm a mother who has 2 to 3 or 4 kids, and I find my knight in shining armor who's going to take on me and my kids and take care of me, my kids, and we're just going to go off into the great horizon on a white horse, living happily ever after underneath a rainbow and all this other bullshit that they're thinking, right? And honestly, this is nothing but baby mama hope. If you were a baby mama, you hope to have this outcome. That's what you hope for. You hope to have this outcome. It's not the simple fact that you're a good woman. It's the simple fact that you hope to have an outcome like Sierra. But see, this is the thing that I've always said about Russell Wilson and Sierra relationship. She had to get on his program. That means you are second fiddle. You are already coming in as damaged goods. And that's what Sierra was. She was damaged goods. The only thing she used to date was the D boys and futures of the world that would impregnate everybody. She was damaged goods. Now Russell wanted her. That was his crush. But he knew that she was damaged goods. That's why he put stipulations on for them even be together. And I think a lot of guys and females miss this point, which is something I've said countless of times. If you're going to get a woman, she's going to have to be on your program, not hers, but on your program. And you see this delusional, especially with Brittany Renner when she was talking to Cam Newton, because that's what exactly she wanted. She wanted a Russell Wilson relationship, but she didn't understand the dynamics of that relationship. Because people seem to forget that Russell Wilson put her on a hiatus of having sex for a year. He's told her, "You're not going to have sex for a year if you're going to be with me." And she complied. Why did she comply? Because I ain't going to give you everything.
No. Yeah, it's a taste. Like young Grizzly said, just a tip.
Yeah. But people still don't get it as to that. I still got people in the comments that just like, "How you know she didn't have sex with her? If she had sex with anybody else, he wouldn't."
Prove it.
Prove that she didn't. Prove that she did.
It proved that she didn't. Yeah, she needed to get out. She probably was on a fast anyway because she just had the baby.
Yeah.
So she probably on a fast anyway.
But
It wasn't that hard.
no. But the thing about what guys need to understand when it comes to this is when it comes to that situation, and just women in general now, it's like 1950s is over. You're not gonna get any more virgins. Most of the women you have dated has probably had like 3 dicks in her mouth before she came to you. So this is just the new way of the world. Like
Yeah.
we can't keep going back into like, oh, what women should be. And
Uh,
Pandora's
unless,
box is open.
unless you're going down to the raid the middle schools.
Yeah, Pandora's box is open. Most
Yeah.
women that you know probably had 3 dicks in their mouth that week. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know why guys get fixated on it. You know, shit. You don't care. You know, it's new to you.
Most guys probably never had had a virgin.
Virgins are actually overrated. Okay, they are. They really are. I had a couple. They're actually very overrated.
Yeah. The only thing that you need to worry about is that is she's going to be down for your program, meaning that you're the lead of the house, you're the lead of this relationship,
Yeah.
and she's following you.
Yeah.
mean-
First of all, you got to have a program for her to follow, and a
Yeah.
lot of guys don't. So, and that's what the first thing have to happen.
Yeah, Patrice O'Neal said it a lot of times with this chick that he was dating. He knew she was a hoe. And he didn't care. He's like, as long as you're there for me.
For me, yeah.
He said, what did he say to that one? What did he say that one time? He said, yeah, she can go out and fuck whoever. As long as she comes back home and suck my dick.
Well, he had a pimp mentality. Cause he had to go. He went down to Brazil, got the fucking pimp mentality. So how it is.
Yeah, but she's like, she don't want fuck. She want love, and that's what I gave her.
But Charles, you didn't keep none of those virgins, though. That's the problem. You didn't keep them. If you had them, if they were worth something, all that special, you'd have kept them. So I said, virgins are overrated.
Yeah. So that's what I say.
Well, black women always had skeletons in the closet, so that's nothing new. That didn't start in the '60s. Okay, that started, back in slave days. So it is.
Whole facts
forgiveness. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go. I guess
you got jokes.
I guess it's time to wrap up. Here we go. We got the jokes coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We started off on a serious note. Now it's deteriorated into the late night coliseum. But anyway, put your link to your channel in again, Art,
All right.
and look, put the link to that video in, in the chat, so
Okay.
people can actually
You
go
just
over
can
and see
go
the rest
off.
of it.
Well, you shared this one.
Did I? Yeah. What it don't
Yeah.
matter. Share it again. What's your count on views?
That's the link to the video. The channel is this. There you go. Top one is the video, and the bottom one is the channel.
Yeah. Go ahead and go on over there. Number one, subscribe, and go see the second half
Sierra's baby mama hope.
baby mama hope. Yeah, I said, oh God, y'all ain't shit.
Hey, it is what it is.
Down with dope, up with hope. All right, Doughboy. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. So, without further ado, we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Peace.